You think being a doctor makes you special? Get out of the car before I drag you out. That's what Officer Barlow snarled at Dr. Xavier Cole, moments before a child nearly died in a hospital bed, waiting for the only surgeon who could save him. But what started as a traffic stop in the pouring rain unraveled into something far bigger. A citywide conspiracy, a smear campaign, and a fight for truth that would shake an entire system. This is the story of a man who refused to stay silent and exposed corruption at the highest levels. Now, before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you. And now let's get back to the story. Move, please, just move. Dr. Xavier Cole slammed his fist against the steering wheel, his voice rising above the torrential drumbeat of rain hammering his windshield. His knuckles were white with pressure, veins like ropes beneath his dark skin. The storm outside wasn't just rain. It was a symphony of chaos. Thunder rolling like a freight train overhead, streetlights flickering in and out like dying fireflies, and water swallowing every inch of Brookhaven's cobblestone roads. The clock on the dashboard blinked, 12:08 a.m. in furious red. 8 minutes. That's all Mason Monroe had left. Maybe? The child's tiny throat had already closed halfway, his oxygen levels plummeting by the second. None of the local physicians had the field training. None of them could perform what Xavier could. An emergency cricothyrotomy with battlefield efficiency. The boy's grandmother, Mayor Regina Monroe, had called him personally, her voice brittle with panic. "Xavier, it's Mason," she'd said, breathless. "His throat's closing. It's bad. They're prepping a trauma bay for you. Please hurry." The sound of her voice still echoed in his mind. And now, just 7 blocks from Brookhaven General, he was crawling behind a line of cars that acted like the storm gave them license to move like molasses. Xavier gritted his teeth, eyes darting between the wipers as they whipped side to side, fighting to clear the river cascading over the windshield. Downtown Brookhaven was deserted except for the line of slow-moving vehicles ahead, their brake lights glowing like distant embers. He glanced at a side street. Empty. A decision snapped in his chest. "Sorry," he muttered, yanking the wheel left. The tires screamed in protest as he shot through the red light, cutting onto a back alley that sliced behind old colonial buildings. He heard horns. Someone yelled. He didn't care. Mason mattered more than any traffic citation. The phone on the passenger seat buzzed, skittering across the leather. He snatched it up and pressed it to his ear without even looking at the caller ID. "Dr. Cole," a frantic voice shouted. "Are you close? Mason's crashing. He's desatting under 50. We need you now." "I'm on Franklin," he said breathlessly. "I'll be there in less than 4 minutes. Prep the OR, get epi and the track kit ready." He ended the call and threw the phone back down. The engine growled as he punched the gas. And that's when he saw it. The flash. Red. Blue. A spotlight tore through his rear window. "No," he whispered. His heart dropped like lead into his stomach. "Not now." The sirens screamed behind him, louder than the storm, insistent and shrill. Xavier's hands tightened on the wheel as his mind raced faster than the truck. He could try to outrun them, but no. A black man speeding through the rain at midnight? That could get him killed before he even saw the barrel flash. He eased off the accelerator and guided the truck to the side, tires sloshing through a puddle that swallowed half the road. He put the vehicle in park, turned on the dome light, and placed both hands firmly on the wheel. He'd done everything right. He had to survive the next 2 minutes. A car door slammed. Boots splashed through water, slow, heavy, deliberate. The silhouette grew in the side mirror. Stocky build, flashlight in one hand, other hovering near the belt. The man's face finally emerged in the glare. White, late 40s, mustache twitching in irritation. "License and registration," he barked without preamble. "Officer," Xavier began, voice even, respectful, urgent. "My name is Dr. Xavier Cole. I'm a trauma surgeon at Brookhaven General. I'm on an emergency call. There's a child dying. He has minutes left. Please, call the hospital and confirm it. Let me go." The officer didn't blink, didn't flinch. "You ran a red light," he said flatly. "That's reckless driving." Xavier inhaled slowly, fighting the heat rising in his chest. "I understand, but I'm asking you. Check dispatch. Call Brookhaven General. Ask for Dr. Cole. The child's name is Mason Monroe. He's 8 years old. He's in critical condition, and I'm the only one who can do this." The officer's hand dropped lower toward his belt. "I said," he growled, "license and registration, now." Xavier nodded slowly, moving like a man disarming a bomb. His fingers trembled, not from guilt but from fury he dared not show. He retrieved his documents from the glove compartment and extended them with an open palm. The officer snatched them and turned away without a word. Xavier watched his reflection in the rearview mirror. His jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. Rain pounded on the cab roof like a war drum. He checked the clock again, 12:11 a.m. Mason had 5 minutes. Maybe less. Another officer appeared, stepping from the patrol car. Younger, leaner, rookie, probably. He and the first cop, whose name badge Xavier hadn't yet seen, stood in the glow of the squad lights, their silhouettes conferring like sentinels passing judgment. They glanced at Xavier's truck like it was a threat. Like he was. Inside the cab, Xavier dropped his head to the steering wheel. He didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't cry. Because he knew that any of those reactions, especially from a black man, could get him pulled out, beaten, maybe even killed. A knock shattered the moment. He looked up, rain cascading through the open window as Officer Barlow, the older one, stood there, dripping and grim. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Xavier froze. "Sir, why? Now?" A slow-motion panic bloomed in Xavier's chest. "Please, I am not resisting, but I need you to understand, if I don't get to that hospital—" "Everyone's got a story," Barlow sneered. "Step out." Xavier stepped into the storm. The cuffs came fast, cold, tight. He barely heard the Miranda rights over the roar of the wind. Somewhere across town, Mason Monroe was gasping for air, and the man who could save him was being shackled in the rain, on a deserted street, by officers too proud to listen and too blind to care. As the cuffs clicked shut, Xavier Cole stared up at the black sky and knew something bigger than a child's life had just broken wide open. Something they weren't ready for. But he was. "You don't understand," Xavier said, his breath catching in the cold, as Officer Barlow gave the handcuffs a final jerk. "Every second you waste could cost a child his life." Barlow smirked beneath his soaked patrol hat. "And every guy we pull over's got a sob story. You think throwing around 'I'm a doctor' gets you a free pass?" "I don't want to pass," Xavier said, trying to hold on to a voice that was rapidly cracking beneath the weight of helplessness. "I want to do my job." But Barlow was already pushing him toward the back seat of the squad car. The rain was relentless now. It slashed across Xavier's face like 1,000 tiny knives. His lab coat was soaked through. The cuffs around his wrists bit into his skin with every jostling movement. He tried not to stumble as Barlow shoved him forward, tried to stay upright, dignified, even as water trickled down the back of his neck and filled his shoes. "You're making a mistake," Xavier said again as Barlow opened the door and forced him into the back seat. Barlow didn't reply. He slammed the door shut, the thunderous sound of it echoing louder than the lightning cracking overhead. Inside the car, Xavier sat rigid, cuffed hands behind him, breath fogging the windows. The interior smelled like old leather and wet asphalt. A sharp ache throbbed in his wrists, but none of that compared to the pain building in his chest. Mason. The boy didn't have minutes anymore. He had moments. A tracheal collapse like that could turn fatal in under 10 if untreated. The hospital had prepped. They'd called for him. And now here he was, treated like a suspect instead of a savior. Officer Dean Palmer slid behind the wheel, his rookie nerves practically vibrating off his damp uniform. He glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a second, their eyes met. "I'm not lying," Xavier said quietly. "Call Brookhaven General. Ask for Trauma Bay 3. They'll tell you." Palmer hesitated, fingers twitching on the steering wheel. Barlow climbed into the passenger seat, his mood as sour as the storm. He tossed the paperwork onto the dash and turned toward his partner. "You believe this guy?" he scoffed. "Mayor's grandson, emergency surgery, red lights mean nothing now?" Palmer's voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should just call it in, just to verify." "You want to get played?" Barlow barked. "That's what they do. Run the play, pull at your heartstrings, and when you cut them loose, bam, civil rights lawsuit." "Officer," Xavier cut in, voice louder now, firmer. "There's a red trauma kit in the back of my truck. Epinephrine, oxygen tanks, portable intubation equipment, my ID badge, my trauma credentials. Check it. Call the hospital. You're not just delaying a man, you're delaying a miracle." You done? Barlow snapped without turning. Because you'll have plenty of time to rehearse your speech at booking. Palmer's hand lingered over the radio. Please, Xavier said again, this time softer, almost a whisper. You don't have to believe me. Just believe the possibility. A silence fell inside the squad car, interrupted only by the rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers and the occasional crackle of the police radio. Palmer turned slightly toward Barlow. What's the harm in checking the hospital? The harm? Barlow spat. The harm is we look like fools when we let some slick talker go, and it turns out he was just another drugged-up idiot with a stolen coat and a fake badge. Xavier clenched his jaw. His entire life had been about saving others, and now his ability to save hung in the balance of two men arguing over whether he deserved to be believed. Barlow pulled out his phone, scrolling with visible irritation. We'll check him at the station. If he's clean, he can walk. That'll take too long, Xavier said, struggling against the cuffs. He's crashing right now. And whose fault is that? Barlow turned around fully now, his voice venomous. Yours. You ran that light. You put yourself in this position. You think the rules don't apply just because you got a title? Xavier's patience snapped, but not with rage, with icy clarity. This isn't about rules, he said. This is about your pride. The silence that followed was thick. Palmer finally reached for the radio. Dispatch, he said, voice shaky. This is Unit 218. Do we have any medical emergency calls logged for a Dr. Xavier Cole? Requesting confirmation. There was static. A beat of silence. Then the radio crackled. Affirmative, 218. Priority call logged at 12:03 a.m. Emergency response requested by Brookhaven General Hospital. Subject, 8-year-old male, Mason Monroe, critical condition. Doctor, Cole was dispatched by name under mayoral authority. Barlow's face went white. Palmer blinked, jaw slack. Xavier sat taller in the back seat, water dripping from his chin. There, he said, voice low. Now let me go. But Barlow didn't budge. Instead, he turned slowly back toward the windshield, his hand tightening into a fist on his thigh. We'll verify at the station, he muttered. Palmer didn't move. You heard the call, Xavier pressed. He's dying. Let me do what you won't. Save him. Palmer turned to Barlow again. Trent, maybe we should. You take those cuffs off, Barlow hissed. You're finished. Palmer hesitated. His hands hovered at the keys on his belt. His eyes darted to Xavier, then back to Barlow. Another crackle on the radio. Update from Brookhaven General, the dispatcher said. Patient Mason Monroe now critical, requesting immediate ETA for Dr. Cole. Time sensitivity under 4 minutes. Repeat, emergency under 4 minutes. That did it. Palmer fumbled with the handcuff key, hands slick with rain. The cuffs clicked open, and Xavier immediately reached down to rub his wrists, raw and burning. You're letting him go? Barlow growled. I'm letting him live, Xavier shot back, already throwing the door open and charging through the storm. Palmer scrambled after him, keys in hand. The rain was so heavy it blurred the entire street into a watercolor smear, but Xavier barely noticed. He yanked open the cruiser's passenger door and climbed in. Drive, he said. Emergency entrance. Palmer didn't argue. He slammed the gas pedal down. The tires squealed and fishtailed over the slick pavement, but the cruiser launched forward. As they tore through the night, Xavier's mind shifted instantly into trauma mode. He ran through everything they might need: dosages, cuts, intubation angles, alternate airway procedures. His fists clenched against his knees. Palmer leaned forward, white-knuckling the wheel. We're almost there, he shouted over the siren. Xavier didn't reply. His mind was already in the trauma bay, his hands already working, his breath synced to the beeping of monitors he hadn't even seen yet. In the distance, through the storm's veil, the red neon glow of Brookhaven General pierced the darkness like a lighthouse. They weren't too late. Not yet, but that would depend on what happened in the next 2 minutes. The police cruiser skidded into the hospital's emergency entrance like a missile. Tires screeching across the slick pavement, headlights slicing through the thick sheets of rain. The instant it stopped, Xavier flung the door open before the vehicle had fully come to a halt. Dr. Cole, a nurse shouted from the entrance, waving him in with gloved hands, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat and rain. He's crashing. Now. Xavier didn't respond. His boots slapped hard against the pavement as he sprinted through the automatic doors of Brookhaven General, rain pouring from his soaked frame. The ER air hit him like a slap, sterile, electric, and thick with panic. The trauma bay was chaos. Monitors screamed. A nurse was bagging a child whose face was nearly purple. A respiratory tech was attempting to adjust the oxygen valve. A young doctor stood frozen at the foot of the gurney, sweat glistening on his brow, completely overwhelmed. Xavier pushed past them all and locked eyes on the boy. Mason Monroe was so small. His tiny frame was dwarfed by wires, tubes, and machines. His chest moved in shallow, pitiful jerks, and his fingers twitched in a way that made Xavier's gut twist. The boy's face, pale, lips blue, was slipping into the early stages of organ failure. "I need 1 milligram of epi now," Xavier barked. "Crash cart to the left. Get me a trach kit. Suction ready. You. Gloves." Staff snapped out of their daze, moving with frantic precision. One nurse tore open a drawer, tossing a pre-filled syringe into Xavier's hand. Another pulled open a cabinet and grabbed the emergency intubation tray. Xavier shed his soaked jacket, leaving it in a wet heap on the floor. His hands moved faster than thought. He snapped on gloves, grabbed the syringe, and without hesitation, plunged the epinephrine directly into the boy's thigh. The room held its breath. "Come on," Xavier thought. "Come on, Mason." The monitors stuttered, then dipped lower. "No, no, no, stay with me, kid," he whispered. He moved fast, already opening the intubation kit. He tilted Mason's head back, but his airway was too swollen. His larynx looked like it was collapsing in real time. "We're not going that route," he muttered, already reaching for the surgical kit. "Doctor," a nurse began, her voice trembling. "Tracheotomy," Xavier said sharply. "Get me light and suction. I need that field cleared now." The seconds passed like hours. The suction machine whined to life. Blood welled beneath the boy's chin as Xavier made his first incision, fast and precise. He could hear a tech gasp behind him, but he couldn't afford distractions. He made the second cut, slipped the tube into the gap he'd carved in Mason's trachea, and nodded to the nurse beside him. "Bag him. Go." The nurse connected the bag and began pumping slowly, watching the boy's chest rise for the first time in nearly 2 minutes. The monitor beeped once, then again. Steady. Shallow, but steady. Xavier exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hands, stained with blood, trembled slightly as the surge of adrenaline began to wear off. "He's not out of the woods," he said quietly. "But he's got a shot now." Behind him, the chaos continued. Staff rushing to secure lines, a respiratory therapist calling up to ICU, a nurse documenting vitals every second. But in that small corner of the trauma bay, everything slowed. Xavier stepped back, peeled off his gloves, and wiped his brow with a sterile towel. And that's when the door burst open. "Where is he?" The voice cracked with urgency and grief. Mayor Regina Monroe pushed through the hallway, her tailored raincoat soaked and clinging to her frame, her eyes wild as they scanned the room. A nurse pointed toward Mason's bed. She rushed forward, then froze. Her gaze fell on her grandson, pale, unconscious, buried under wires and monitors. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself, one hand clutched to her mouth as a sob escaped her chest. The room, once chaotic, felt completely still. Xavier stood to the side, breathing heavily, his shirt clinging to him like a second skin, streaked with rain and blood. Mayor Monroe's eyes darted toward him. Recognition flickered, relief, then something deeper, horror. She stepped toward him. "You saved him?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Xavier nodded, silent. For a moment, her eyes glistened. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, the doors slammed open again. Officer Barlow. His boots hit the linoleum like gunshots. Behind him, Officer Palmer trailed a few feet back, his face pale. "You!" Barlow shouted, pointing at Xavier. "You think you can run around playing God after what you pulled?" The entire ER staff froze. Xavier turned, his expression shifting from relief to steel. "I saved that child," he said, stepping forward. "You disobeyed orders," Barlow snapped, voice rising. "You endangered people on the road. You assaulted officers. You're under arrest." Xavier stared at him in disbelief. And then, he laughed. It was sharp, hollow, a release of too many hours of tension, humiliation, fury. "You want to cuff me again?" he said. "After I just saved the mayor's grandson?" "You assaulted a peace officer," Barlow snapped again. "You're not walking out of here like some hero." But Mayor Monroe stepped in front of him, her voice ice cold. "You will not lay a hand on him." Barlow blinked. "With all due respect." "No," she said, "without it." Barlow hesitated, But Xavier saw the flicker of something else in his eyes. Fear. The room was silent, except for the low hum of machines and the rhythmic beeping of Mason's vitals. Palmer looked like he wanted to disappear. "I'll make this very clear," Mayor Monroe said. "You touch him again and I will bury your badge, your pension, and your reputation so deep you'll never crawl out." Barlow opened his mouth, but the moment had passed. He wasn't in control anymore. He turned, muttering curses under his breath, and stalked out of the room. Palmer lingered, then followed without a word. Xavier finally let himself exhale. Mayor Monroe turned back to him, her voice softer now. "I don't even know what to say." "Don't say anything," Xavier replied. "Just make sure they don't try to spin this." Her jaw tightened. "They're going to come for you, and I know it, but I promise you this, I'm not letting them win." Xavier nodded once, slowly, then his eyes returned to Mason's bed. The boy's vitals were stable, for now. But the real storm was still coming. And Xavier Cole knew exactly what side he'd be on when it hit. The walls of the consultation room felt like they were breathing, closing in and pulling tight with every second that passed. Xavier sat stiffly in the chair, his soaked clothes forming a growing puddle beneath him. He wasn't cold anymore. He was beyond cold. He was furious. Mayor Regina Monroe paced the small space like a lioness in a cage, her soaked pumps clicking against the tile with each turn. "We owe you everything," she said for the third time, "and I will make this right." Xavier didn't respond. He stared at the wall, his fists clenched on his knees. His mind was still in that trauma bay. Mason's face still swam behind his eyes. So close, too close. Then a knock on the door. A wiry man in a rumpled gray suit stepped inside, a man who looked more like a paper pusher than a threat. But the moment he opened his mouth, Xavier knew he was holding something rotten. "Mayor Monroe," the man said carefully, "apologies for the interruption, but there's been a request from the department." Xavier lifted his head slowly. "Request?" The man swallowed. "Chief Avery is asking that Dr. Cole be temporarily detained for questioning. Standard review procedures. Pending internal investigation." Mayor Monroe didn't blink. "For what?" The administrator shifted his weight. "They're alleging he endangered officers, resisted arrest, possibly removed medical equipment under questionable authorization." Xavier stood, straightened. He took a single step forward, enough to make the administrator stumble back one pace. "Let me get this straight," Xavier said slowly. "I just saved the mayor's grandson from dying, barely, and they want to arrest me for not dying quietly in handcuffs?" The administrator's voice trembled. "I'm just the messenger." "The message," Xavier said, stepping closer, "is that they're afraid. And they should be." Mayor Monroe stepped between them, her voice firm and fast. "Xavier, don't give them anything they can use." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice now tight with rage. "If they want me, they can come drag me out of this hospital in front of every news camera and every nurse who just watched me save a child's life." The administrator shifted again. "Security's asking if we should escort him to a holding area, just until things are sorted." "Sorted?" Xavier snapped. "The only thing that's going to get sorted is this system, if it survives what I'm about to do." The mayor held up a hand, commanding calm. "Give us a moment," she said to the administrator. He nodded and stepped out quickly, pulling the door shut behind him. Xavier turned away, rubbing his temples with both hands, his breath shaky. "They want to bury it," he said finally. "They want me silent, afraid, discredited. And if you give them fire," the mayor said, "they'll burn you alive." She walked to the small desk in the corner and pulled out a thin manila folder. It looked like it had been soaked, dried, then soaked again. She dropped it on the table. Xavier looked at it, didn't touch it. "What is that?" he asked. Her answer was almost a whisper. "An offer." He raised an eyebrow. "They'll drop everything," she said. "No charges, no record, but you have to sign a non-disclosure. Walk away, quiet, no press, no lawsuits, no speeches." Xavier let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "They want me to pretend it never happened?" "They want the press conference not to happen," she said, "and the story never to leave this room." Xavier finally picked up the folder. The contract inside was short, 2 pages, legally neat, unmistakably threatening. Silence in exchange for freedom. "They're scared," he said, tossing the paper back down. "Scared I'll say something they can't erase." "Because you can," the mayor said. "You have the power to. That's why they're coming at you sideways." He looked at her. You want me to take this? No, she said after a beat. I don't, but I want you to survive. Because if you go public, they will come for you, Xavier. They will smear you, destroy your career, your license, your reputation. You'll never work in medicine again, not in this state, maybe not in this country. Xavier paced the room now, his fists opened and closed rhythmically. I can't sign that, he muttered. I know, she said. He stopped, looked her in the eyes. Then why give it to me? To remind you what it'll cost, she said softly. Because they won't stop at lies. If you speak, they'll call you unstable. Say you endangered a child. Say you were emotionally compromised. You'll be a target, Xavier. And not everyone in Brookhaven wears a uniform. Xavier went still. His voice, when it came, was like glass, thin, brittle, cutting. If I walk away now, I'm no better than they are. I agree, the mayor said, but that doesn't make it easier. A knock on the door. Again. This time, Officer Palmer. His face was pale. Rain still clung to his hair. His hands were clasped in front of him like a child waiting to be scolded. Xavier turned toward him with a hard stare. What do you want? He asked. Palmer didn't meet his eyes. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Silence. I should have stopped him, Palmer said, voice cracking. I should have said something. Xavier took a step forward. You should have, he said. And one day you'll have to live with the fact that you didn't. Palmer's face crumpled, but he nodded. I know. He turned and left without another word. Xavier stared at the door for a long time, then turned back to Mayor Monroe. This isn't just about me, he said. This is about all the people who won't be believed next time, who won't have your grandson in their back pocket to make the world care. She nodded slowly. You tell them, Xavier said. No deal. The mayor didn't smile, but she looked a little less broken. They're going to come for you, she said again. Xavier shrugged. Let them. Another sharp knock at the door. This time, the voice on the other side wasn't afraid. It was desperate. Dr. Cole, a nurse's voice shouted. It's Mason. He's crashing again. Xavier didn't hesitate. He flung the door open and sprinted into the hallway. The choice had been made. The fight wasn't over. But for Mason, and for the city, he'd already decided what he would risk. Everything. Xavier burst through the ICU doors like a soldier into battle, the soles of his soaked boots skidding across the polished linoleum as the alarms began screaming in unison. The trauma team was already in motion. Mason Monroe's small body convulsed violently on the hospital bed, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps, muscles twitching from oxygen deprivation. His heart monitor screamed one long, dreadful note, and then stuttered into a wild, erratic rhythm. Xavier didn't stop running until he was beside the bed, shoving a frozen resident aside with a single sharp motion. What happened? He barked. Airway obstruction. Tube may have shifted during suction, a nurse shouted, panic cracking her voice. Oxygen dropped below 40. He started seizing, then flatline. Xavier's hands were already moving. The ventilator was still connected, but Mason's chest wasn't responding. The tracheal incision he'd made earlier was swelling shut. The boy was suffocating again, this time with no margin for error. Bag him, Xavier ordered. Suction and recheck placement. Now. But it wasn't going to be enough. He could see it in Mason's face, the cyanosis deepening, lips a dull bluish gray, his tiny fingers curled inward. The monitors were flashing warnings faster than the eye could read. This wasn't an airway emergency anymore. This was war. Get the crash cart, Xavier shouted, spinning to face the nurses. We're doing a surgical airway, again. No pulse, one of the residents whispered. Xavier's heart turned to ice. Clear, he roared, grabbing the defibrillator paddles from the cart as it screeched to a halt beside him. A nurse gelled them, hands trembling. He pressed them to Mason's chest. Clear. The boy's body jolted. Still nothing. Charge to 150. Again. Doctor, the nurse began, voice shaking. I said clear. The second shock made the entire bed rattle. The monitor dipped, paused, then blinked once, twice, a heartbeat. Weak, barely there, but there. Track kit, Xavier said through clenched teeth, already slicing through the surgical tape at Mason's neck. He worked fast, clean, despite the sweat now pouring down his brow and the noise of the storm rattling the windows. Blood welled, but he didn't blink. His hands knew what to do. The new tube slid in with a sickening suction. Bag him? Now. The nurse connected the oxygen bag and squeezed. A second passed. Then Mason's chest rose. Then again, a soft beep returned to the heart monitor. And another. And another. Steady, slow, but climbing. Xavier sagged slightly, one hand on the edge of the bed for support, his body screaming from fatigue. "He's back," a nurse whispered, half in disbelief. "He's actually back." The room exhaled as one. But Xavier didn't relax. He stripped off his gloves, wiped the blood from his hands, and turned toward the hallway, where half the hospital now stood frozen. Reporters, nurses, security, even Mayor Monroe, her eyes red but locked in steely focus, had been watching through the ICU's observation window. At the far end of the corridor, two uniformed officers stepped into view, flanking a third man. Chief Douglas Avery, tall, barrel-chested, bald, the creased lines of arrogance etched permanently into his face. He didn't march, he prowled. "There he is," Avery said, pointing at Xavier. "Take him into custody." The two officers began to advance, hands moving toward their belts. In the trauma bay, the medical team turned in horror. "No," Mayor Monroe snapped, stepping into their path. "You will not touch him." Avery barely spared her a glance. "He disobeyed lawful orders, endangered public safety, and stole hospital property. I don't care whose grandson he just saved. He's under arrest." "He saved a child's life," the mayor shouted, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "Your officers nearly killed him because they couldn't see past their own damn egos." Xavier raised his hand slowly, not out of surrender, but out of strategy. "No sudden movements," he said loudly, making sure every reporter nearby heard it. "No resistance. I am unarmed. I am a physician. I am here saving lives." Nurses and doctors pulled out their phones. The hallway lit up with the glow of camera flashes. Avery's jaw twitched. His men froze, uncertain. "You really want to do this right here?" Xavier asked, his voice sharp with control. "In front of your city? In front of the people you're supposed to protect?" "This isn't over," Avery snarled. "It never is," Xavier replied coldly. The chief turned, snapped his fingers. His men retreated. But it wasn't retreat, it was delay. A regroup. Xavier could see it in Avery's eyes. He wasn't done, he was just looking for a different weapon. Mayor Monroe turned to Xavier, voice low now. "You need legal counsel. Protection. You're not just a witness anymore. You're the spark, and they'll do everything they can to put you out." "I figured," Xavier said, breath still shallow. "But I'm not backing down, not now." "Good," she said, "because what happens next, it's going to shake the whole city." They both turned to look back into Mason's room. The boy's chest rose and fell in rhythm now. The storm outside was still raging, but inside that room for now, there was life. And outside of it, the reckoning had begun. The staff lounge felt like it hadn't been updated since the early 90s. Cracked linoleum floors, a coffee machine that sputtered out bitter sludge, posters on the wall urging hand-washing and kindness to coworkers. None of it belonged to the moment Xavier and Mayor Regina Monroe now found themselves in. She closed the door behind them, her soaked raincoat clinging to her frame. Xavier was leaning forward in one of the hard chairs, elbows on knees, hands locked, his knuckles white with pressure. "I just got a call," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "from someone I never expected to hear from again." He didn't speak, just looked up, his gaze sharp and steady. "The governor," she said. "He wants this, buried." Xavier's stomach dropped. "What?" "He didn't say it outright," she went on, pacing, "but it was clear. He's hearing about this. The footage, the press conference. He's worried this scandal will taint his administration, especially now, election year." Xavier stood slowly, his body still stiff from the adrenaline crash. "You're telling me this goes beyond Brookhaven?" She nodded. "It always did." He swallowed hard. "What are you saying?" Mayor Monroe walked over to the small table and dropped a tattered folder onto it. Water-stained, corners bent, edges frayed. Xavier stared at it like it might explode. "This," she said quietly, "is what I've been sitting on for 3 months. Things that never added up. Disappearing funds, police budgets that doubled without explanation, public contracts going to private firms with no bids. At first, I thought it was poor bookkeeping. Then I started digging." Xavier flipped the folder open. Inside, copies of city contracts, surveillance photos, checks, memos, redacted reports, names, signatures, a web. At the center of it, the Brookhaven Police Department, and radiating outward, private security firms, real estate development companies, construction conglomerates. One photo showed Chief Avery shaking hands with a man Xavier recognized. Cliff Dorman, the CEO of Southside Development, the company that had been buying up land in historically black neighborhoods. Another image showed Avery sitting at a dinner table with 2 state senators. Another, him toasting with the head of Vigilant Shield, a private paramilitary security group contracted for community safety programs. "It's not just dirty cops," the mayor said, her voice lurvious. "It's systemic. They've been inflating crime statistics in black neighborhoods to justify redevelopment projects, claiming they need more patrols, then driving property values down, buying up the land, and gentrifying it." Xavier sat down slowly. "They don't just want people like me silenced," he said. "They want our communities gone." She nodded. "And anyone who speaks out, doctors, teachers, journalists, parents, gets discredited or disappeared." Xavier looked up at her, eyes narrowed. "You're telling me I just stumbled into something bigger than a traffic stop?" "I'm telling you," she said, "you just cracked open a vault that a lot of powerful men have spent years keeping locked." A silence fell. Thunder rolled distantly, and for a moment, all they could hear was the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Xavier leaned forward, jaw clenched. "They'll try to erase me." "They're already trying," she said. "Did you notice the hospital administrator earlier? The moment he got the call from Avery, he was ready to throw you into a holding room. The pressure is coming from the top." "So what do we do?" She hesitated. "Then, I'm calling a press conference tomorrow morning." He looked at her. "Hard," he said. Her eyebrows raised. "No? Not tomorrow," Xavier said, standing. "Tonight." She blinked. "Xavier, it's nearly 3 a.m. "All the better," he said. "They're not expecting it. They're scrambling right now, cleaning emails, burning papers, coaching people on what to say. We won't have time to prepare. We don't need to prepare. We need the truth. We have the folder. We have the dispatch call. We have video. Let's hit them before they can hide the bodies." She studied him for a long moment. He looked exhausted. Blood still stained the sleeves of his scrubs, but in his eyes, fire, purpose. "You'll be there?" she asked. "I'll be standing right beside you," he said. "But first, I need to check on Mason." She nodded. "I'll call the reporters." He turned toward the door, but she stopped him with one last question. "Xavier?" He paused. "You know, if you do this, they're going to come after you. Not just legally, personally. They'll dig through your past, look for anything to ruin you." "I know. And if they can't find anything, they'll make something up." He looked back over his shoulder. "Then they'll have to try harder." She gave him a tight smile. "Good man." Then she was on her phone, already dialing as Xavier walked out into the hallway again. But he didn't feel like a good man. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing he had to jump. And he just hoped there was something worth landing on. The hospital lobby, normally sterile and quiet in the early hours, now buzzed with energy. Cameras were being set up in a tight semicircle, tripods adjusted, reporters whispered into microphones. Red standby lights blinked like warning signals in the dark. Several hospital staff members lingered near the walls, trying to look busy, but they weren't here for work. They were here to witness what was about to happen. Mayor Regina Monroe stood beneath the harsh overhead lighting, her soaked hair tied back hastily. Her tailored navy blazer, now slightly wrinkled, clung to her shoulders with the last traces of the storm. She took a breath, steeled her spine. Then she stepped toward the row of microphones. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady but vibrating with tension, "tonight you're going to hear the truth." The room hushed. Xavier stood just behind her, the manila folder clutched tightly in his left hand. His right hand was still red and raw from the trauma procedures. Every inch of his body ached, his soul too. But his jaw was set, his eyes unblinking. They couldn't stop this now. Not anymore. "This city almost lost a child tonight," Mayor Monroe continued, her voice rising, "not because of a failure in medicine, but because of a failure in humanity, because of arrogance, because of prejudice, because of a system that protects power over people." A ripple ran through the reporters. They straightened, focused. Xavier stepped forward now, unfolding the water-damaged folder as if it were sacred. In a way, it was. "This isn't just about a traffic stop," he said, his voice gravel and fire. "It's about a culture, a disease, one that has infected our law enforcement, our government, our contracts, and our so-called community safety programs." He held up the first photo, Chief Avery shaking hands with the Southside Development CEO. They claimed they needed to increase patrols for safety, he continued. In reality, they inflated crime stats in black neighborhoods to depress property values, then sold those blocks to developers. Quiet deals, dirty hands. He handed the photo to a reporter in the front row. Another document came up, an email between Brookhaven PD and a private paramilitary firm. "Here's your community outreach initiative," he said, disgust creeping into his voice. They redirected city funds into contracts with private security firms like Vigilant Shield, run by former officers who now operate with zero oversight. They created their own enforcement machine, shielded from lawsuits and free to intimidate anyone they wanted. Mayor Monroe took the mic again. "These officers weren't acting alone," she said. "They were part of a system built to keep people like Dr. Cole afraid, silenced, and disposable." Flashes exploded from the cameras now. Reporters scribbled furiously. Xavier's heart pounded. Not from nerves, from clarity. "This is what happened when I was pulled over," he said, laying down the dispatch transcript. "I wasn't just profiled, I was delayed, arrested, mocked, while a child flatlined in a trauma bay waiting for me. Why? Because 2 officers didn't believe a black man in scrubs could be telling the truth." He turned slowly to face the cameras head-on. They were willing to let that child die to preserve their pride. Another microphone picked up. "Dr. Cole, will you be filing a lawsuit against the city?" A woman with short-cropped hair and piercing eyes asked. Xavier looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not here for a payout," he said. "I'm here because no one should have to choose between saving a life and surviving a traffic stop." The reporters murmured again. Mayor Monroe stepped forward. "Effective immediately," she said, voice commanding. "I'm calling for a full independent investigation into the Brookhaven Police Department. Chief Douglas Avery is hereby placed on administrative leave pending review. Officer Trent Barlow is suspended without pay. And any officer found to be complicit in these corrupt practices will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law." The lobby erupted. Flashbulbs popped. Questions were hurled. Xavier stepped back from the mics, breathing heavily, every nerve in his body still lit with adrenaline. He caught sight of someone near the back. Officer Dean Palmer, standing stiffly in uniform, watching. Maybe he'd finally understood something. Maybe not. But he was here, and he wasn't laughing. Xavier looked away, scanning the crowd. That's when he saw Lena Jacobs, the young nurse from earlier. She was standing just off to the side, hands clasped together, watching him the way someone might watch a man standing in the middle of a battlefield, bloodied, but not broken. "You saved him," she said softly as he passed by her. "Not just Mason, a lot of us." Xavier didn't have words, he just nodded, tight, grim, grateful, but not satisfied, because it wasn't over. Not yet. He turned down the hallway toward the ICU. Every hallway he walked now carried echoes, footsteps behind him, whispers from corners, glances he could feel even when he couldn't see. Some in awe, some in fear, some in calculation. He didn't care. He had a child to check on, a promise to keep, and a war that had only just begun. By dawn, Brookhaven wasn't sleeping anymore. The press conference had been expected to hit local news sometime mid-morning. Instead, it exploded before the sun rose. Clips of Mayor Monroe's searing statements aired on 3 networks before 6 a.m. Footage of Xavier standing beside her, eyes blazing, folder in hand, went viral before most of the city had poured their first cup of coffee. And the dispatch audio? It was everywhere. Dr. Xavier Cole, emergency response authorized under mayoral order, child critical, repeat, critical. It crackled through phones, TVs, car stereos, and across social feeds like a siren call. Xavier Cole had gone from anonymous trauma surgeon to the man who'd stood alone and then set the whole damn system on fire. And just like that, the whole city was watching. He sat alone in the staff lounge now, slumped in the same chair as the night before, but the silence was gone. His phone buzzed non-stop on the table in front of him. Voicemails, messages, missed calls, some from news stations begging for interviews. Some from colleagues, some from unknown numbers. He tapped open one text, "Back off before you regret it, this isn't your fight." Then another, "We see you, we know where you live." He locked the phone and let it slide face down. He'd expected this. He just didn't expect it to feel so fast. So intimate. The threats weren't coming from some random corner of the internet. These were local. People who knew his name, knew where he worked, knew how to rattle him. But it didn't stop the other messages, ones that came in just as fast and just as fierce. You're a hero. You spoke for all of us. My son wants to be a doctor like you now. Thank you for standing up. Xavier leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and buried his face in his hands. He wasn't used to being seen. He wasn't used to being heard. Now the entire country was screaming his name. The door creaked open behind him. He didn't turn, just said quietly, "I'm not doing interviews today." "It's not press," said a familiar voice. Mayor Monroe stepped inside, holding 2 cups of black coffee. She looked even more exhausted than he did. He accepted the cup with a nod. "No sleep?" she asked. Xavier shook his head. "I've spent the past 5 hours answering media requests and brushing off warnings from lawyers who think I should have kept my mouth shut." "Same," she said. They sat in silence for a moment. "You know," she said softly, "last night, before I called that press conference, I asked myself what it was I was really trying to protect. My office, my reputation, my city's image, and then I saw you walk back into that ER covered in rain and blood, still focused on saving a child's life, and I realized," she trailed off, "that I was protecting the wrong thing." Xavier didn't speak. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," she added. "I'm not here for debt," Xavier replied. "I'm here for accountability." She smiled faintly. "And you're going to get it." He raised an eyebrow. "City Council just voted unanimously to open a federal investigation into the Brookhaven Police Department," she said. "Chief Avery is suspended. Trent Barlow was officially charged this morning. Civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, falsifying reports, and they're already looking into past cases he was involved in." Xavier felt the smallest flicker of satisfaction in his chest. Not joy, but something close to forward motion. "Doesn't fix everything," he said. "No," she agreed. "But it's a start." He sipped the coffee, bitter, hot, necessary. She watched him for a moment. "How's Mason?" "He's stable," Xavier said. "Still sedated, still fighting." She exhaled with visible relief. "Thank God." They both sat in silence for another long beat, and then the mayor leaned in. "There's something else," she said, "something bigger." Xavier stiffened. "How much bigger?" "Statewide," she said. "Possibly federal. The deeper I dig, the more I find links between these crooked development deals, the police public safety contracts, and political campaign money." She paused. "And I'm not just talking Brookhaven anymore. I'm talking Atlanta, Augusta, maybe D.C. Xavier leaned back slowly. His mind reeled. "This isn't just a city problem," she said. "It's a system problem." And he believed her. Because it always was. He finished the coffee and stood. "You're going to keep pushing it?" he asked. "All the way," she said. He nodded, and then quietly, "Then so will I." The mayor gave a single solemn nod. "You're going to need protection." "I've worked in field hospitals during civil wars," Xavier said. "I've been shot at for giving care. I'll take threats over silence any day." Another knock interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in. "Dr. Cole," she said, eyes bright. "Mason's awake." Xavier stood at the foot of the hospital bed, watching as the boy blinked slowly against the sterile lights. He was pale, fragile, but alive. A ventilator tube had been swapped for a lighter nasal line. His chest rose in steady rhythm. Mayor Monroe was already at his side, tears streaming down her face, holding the child's hand as he reached weakly for her. "You're safe," she whispered, brushing his hair back. "You're going to be okay." Xavier said nothing. He couldn't. His throat was tight, his heart heavier than ever. Because the boy's innocence, his tiny fingers gripping his grandmother's, was a reminder of what they had almost lost. And what so many had lost, without cameras, without headlines, without anyone to speak for them. Not anymore. Xavier turned and walked to the window, looking out over Brookhaven as the morning sun finally broke through the retreating clouds. There would be backlash, there would be more threats. But the truth was no longer a secret. It had a name, and that name was Xavier Cole. By noon, the sunshine outside Brookhaven General felt almost insulting. It was the kind of day made for recovery, for breathing easy. The storm clouds had cleared, the air was fresh. But inside the hospital, and across the city, the real storm had only just begun. The first wave came from the local morning show, a guest segment featuring a former assistant district attorney and a so-called community safety advisor. They didn't name Xavier outright, but they didn't have to. We're seeing more and more cases where professionals, even doctors, act irresponsibly under pressure, endangering public safety in the name of ego. There's no doubt that what happened was unfortunate, but what if the situation had turned violent? What if that officer had been harmed? You can't just blow through red lights and expect immunity because you wear scrubs. They smiled, nodded, patted each other on the back, and sipped their coffee like they weren't laying the groundwork for a public character execution. By 1 p.m., an anonymous blog had posted a grainy photo of Xavier from 5 years ago at a protest. The headline screamed, "Radical Doctor, is Brookhaven's new hero really a threat to law and order?" The article beneath it was even worse. Sources close to the Brookhaven PD claim Dr. Xavier Cole has a history of hostility toward police, including multiple complaints filed against officers in the past decade. Records show he was disciplined for insubordination during a hospital lockdown drill in 2019. Is this really the man we want leading the charge for justice? Xavier stared at the article in disbelief. Insubordination? He'd questioned a lockdown protocol after officers had pointed AR-15s at nurses during a simulation. The hospital had quietly erased the record and thanked him behind closed doors. Now it was front-page fodder. By 2 p.m., his inbox had over 200 messages. Half were support. Half were hate. By 2:30, his hospital access badge was temporarily deactivated, pending review, the email said. For your safety and the safety of others. Xavier leaned back in his chair in the hospital conference room, watching the ceiling spin slowly above him. They're trying to freeze you out, Mayor Monroe said, seated across from him. Her laptop sat open between them. This is the second oldest tactic in the book. Discredit the messenger before the message can take hold. It's working, Xavier said bitterly. They've got people wondering if I'm some rogue activist with a scalpel. She leaned forward. And are you? Xavier looked her dead in the eyes. No, I'm a trauma surgeon who did his job. And that's exactly what terrifies them, she replied. You didn't just break the narrative, you shattered it. You're not screaming in the street, you're standing in an operating room, saving lives. You're what they can't erase. They're trying, he muttered. They're failing, she corrected. You're still here. The door opened behind them. Officer Dean Palmer stepped in, hat in hand. Xavier tensed. You lost? Palmer shook his head slowly. No, sir. There was a long pause. I'm not here as a cop, Palmer said. I'm here because I saw what they're doing to you and he hesitated. I let Barlow railroad you, he admitted. I could have stopped it. I didn't. But this smear campaign, it's not just unethical. It's dangerous. They're going to try to bury you, like they've buried others. Xavier's jaw tightened. Then help me stop them. Palmer's eyes widened. What? You've seen it from the inside. You've watched how the sausage gets made. You've heard Avery, haven't you? Palmer swallowed. He's not just trying to save his job. He's trying to preserve a network. I've seen officers shredding files. I've seen encrypted phone apps being deleted off department phones. It's like a panic button went off after your press conference. Mayor Monroe turned toward Xavier. We need that documented. Palmer nodded. I can get screenshots, internal memos, dispatch logs, but I need whistleblower protection. If I go public, I lose everything. You already did, Xavier said quietly. When you stood there and said nothing, Palmer winced but nodded. I know. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. This, he said, placing it on the table, is a start. It's the unedited dashcam footage from the night of the stop. Shows Barlow ignoring dispatch. Shows him laughing after cuffing you. Shows everything. Xavier stared at it. You sure about this? He asked. No, Palmer admitted. But it's time. Mayor Monroe snatched up the drive. I'll send it to national media. Today? Xavier looked at Palmer again. Really looked at him. He still didn't trust him. But trust wasn't the point. Truth was, and they needed every ounce of it. By 5 p.m., the footage was broadcast across national TV. It wasn't a soundbite. It wasn't edited. It was brutal. Barlow's laughter, Xavier's calm pleading, the officers joking about making him miss his big superhero moment. The public reaction was immediate. Talk show hosts called it disgusting. A major Atlanta newspaper ran a headline that read, Brookhaven PD caught mocking surgeon as child nearly dies. Public outrage boils over. The smear campaign shattered like cheap glass. And for the first time since that rain-soaked night, Xavier felt something shift. Not closure, but momentum. and the realization that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop reacting and start leading. That night, as the sun set in fiery orange across Brookhaven, Xavier stood on the hospital rooftop, watching the city below him. His city. He'd once thought he was just a doctor, but now he was something else, a symbol, a wedge in the machinery, and he wasn't going to stop until the whole thing cracked wide open. The Georgia State Capitol building loomed tall and stoic against the late afternoon sky, its gold dome catching the last glints of sunlight like a beacon. Just beneath it, in a marble-walled hearing room packed tighter than a courtroom on verdict day, Dr. Xavier Cole took his oath and stepped behind the microphone. The chamber was silent, not out of respect, but gravity. Even the hum of the old ceiling fans seemed to pause. A senator leaned forward. "Dr. Cole, you have the floor." Xavier took a breath, not for nerves, but for memory. He remembered the sirens, the cuffs, the rain, and Mason's eyes fluttering in and out of life. "I stand before you today," Xavier began, voice clear, deep, unwavering, as a physician, as a black man, and as someone who nearly watched a child die, not because we lacked medicine, but because this system lacks accountability. Gasps rippled through the room. He let them. "I was detained while responding to an emergency call," he continued. "I identified myself, provided credentials, begged for the opportunity to save a dying child. I was mocked, ignored, arrested." He locked eyes with the committee. That child was the grandson of the mayor. That child survived. But ask yourself, would this room be full if he hadn't? Would I be speaking now if that child didn't carry a politically valuable last name? One of the panel members shifted uncomfortably. Xavier let the silence hang. "Everything I'm telling you is backed by evidence, dispatch logs, body cam footage, whistleblower testimony. This isn't speculation. It's fact." He paused, then added, "And it's not just about Brookhaven. It's not just about me. This is happening in cities across America, smaller towns, larger systems. When law enforcement is used to protect profit instead of people, the result is always the same: injustice. Silenced voices, dead kids." A senator frowned. "Doctor, some argue you've politicized this incident." "No," Xavier said flatly. "They politicized my skin." I responded with the truth. Silence again, but not uncomfortable now, respectful. The kind that comes when a room full of power realizes it's staring at something real, something unshakable and unafraid. Afterward, reporters mobbed the steps, cameras flashed, microphones hovered like bees. "Dr. Cole, are you considering a civil suit? Do you plan to run for office? Have you been in contact with the Department of Justice?" Xavier answered only one question. "What's next?" He looked straight at the nearest camera. "We rebuild," he said, "from the ground up." In the weeks that followed, Brookhaven transformed in ways no one saw coming. Chief Douglas Avery resigned in disgrace. Trent Barlow was charged and later convicted, civil rights violations, misconduct, and obstruction. Mayor Regina Monroe launched the Brookhaven Transparency Initiative, which included independent police oversight, a civilian review board with subpoena power, and the first public audit of all city contracts in over 15 years. Private security firms were ejected. Developers who had profited from backdoor gentrification deals found themselves the subject of state subpoenas. And Dr. Xavier Cole? He became more than a name. He became a movement. Hospitals across the country invited him to speak. Law students studied his case. Activists reached out from cities as far as Oakland and Chicago, asking for guidance, for solidarity, for truth. But Xavier didn't care about the headlines. He cared about the ones who didn't have his voice, his credentials, his protection. The ones who still got pulled over, still got ignored, still got buried before they could even speak. He made a promise. Not on my watch. So he launched something new. The Cole Foundation for Medical Equity and Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting first responders of color, funding legal support for whistleblowers in law enforcement and healthcare, and training trauma doctors in implicit bias awareness. He never forgot Mason. Every time he spoke, every time he walked into a boardroom or courtroom, he saw that child's face. A child gasping for air, while two officers decided whether he was worth believing. A child whose survival changed the fate of an entire city. 2 months later, he returned to Memorial ICU. It was quiet now, peaceful. He knocked gently on the door to room 14. Mayor Monroe looked up from the chair beside Mason's bed. The boy was sitting upright, finally free of the last of the machines. A coloring book sat in his lap. His eyes lit up when he saw Xavier. "Hey, Doc," Mason called out a little hoarsely. Xavier smiled, stepping inside. "Hey there, hero." "You saved me," the boy said, shyly but proudly. "You saved me," Xavier replied, kneeling beside him. "You reminded me what matters most." Mayor Monroe stood and hugged Xavier tightly. "He's breathing because of you." Xavier shook his head. "He's breathing because he fought, because your staff didn't give up, because a community chose to open its eyes." The mayor nodded. Her voice cracked when she said, "I wish it didn't take almost losing him to see it." "Now you do," Xavier said gently. "That's what matters." Mason tugged on Xavier's sleeve. "Are you really going to fix the police?" Xavier knelt beside him. "We're going to try, little man, and we're not going to stop until it's better. For everyone." Mason nodded solemnly, then returned to coloring. A firefighter in a cape. Xavier stood slowly, walking toward the window. The city glowed beyond the glass. Streets alive, sirens distant, skies clear. His name was known, his face was on headlines. But that wasn't his victory. The real victory, the boy breathing behind him. The mother who no longer feared walking down her street. The officer who broke his silence. The city that refused to look away. And the truth. The truth no longer buried in rain or drowned in silence, but spoken aloud by a man who refused to back down. Dr. Xavier Cole had saved a life that night. But in doing so, he'd lit a fire. And the world had finally started to burn its old lies to the ground. To anyone watching this, if you've ever been dismissed, profiled, or silenced just for doing the right thing, remember this: you are not alone. Dr. Xavier Cole didn't set out to be a hero. He set out to save a child's life. But when the system tried to bury the truth, he stood up anyway. And so can we. If this story stirred something in you, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this. Drop a comment and tell us, what would you have done if you were in Xavier's shoes? Together, we rise, not in silence, but in solidarity.